Hello, and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. We all know that life is hard, right? It's messy, it's unpredictable, but it can be wonderful all at the same time. My hope is that we can take a deep dive into self-development topics and explore life's lessons through book clubs, conversations, and interviews. And together, we can uncover the lessons that others have already learned to help us navigate this crazy, wonderful ride called life. Hello and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. I'm your host, Marianne, and since this episode will be the last episode of 2023, I thought I would do a short solo episode to update you on a few things going on in my life and share some of the lessons and perspective I've gained this year. So, as some of you may remember, I had a wedding to attend across the country back in November, and I was doing some internal wrestling about how much planning to put into that trip. If you didn't get to listen, you may want to check out the episode from mid-October. It was called Travel Philosophy, to plan or not to plan. But the short story is that I've always been a planner when it comes to travel. Historically, I plan everything down to the most minute detail just to make sure I've thought of everything and I'm getting the most out of my time and money. But as the trips started to get closer, I started to feel more and more angst over the fact that I hadn't locked in any details yet. And even though I was feeling that angst, I just couldn't commit to sitting down and doing that planning exercise. The truth is that I found myself really reluctant to allocate that much time, the amount of time I normally would give to the planning cycle. So the challenge was, do I give up the time and put that planning in place so that I had all the details and made sure that I got to see everything, got to do everything, went everywhere that, gets highlighted in all the marketing material and got the most for my money? Or do I just do some high-level planning? Well, the decision was that I was going to do only the high-level planning because I realized that was more balanced. It aligned more with who I am now, or at least who I'm trying to be most of the time, in that I don't want to waste hours and hours and hours to a planning process. I want to limit that so that I can take that time and focus it on other things that I really prioritize and cherish more in my life now. So with that decision made, I got to work and I focused on creating a high-level plan and kind of doing the big ticket items. So yes, I booked the airplane flights and booked a car, and I actually booked a couple nights hotel that had to be in a specific location for events that were going on with the weddings. So I got that stuff done. But the rest of it, I just decided to be more spontaneous, more go with the flow, and leave lots of room to let the trip unfold real time. So I could use most of my time leading up to the trip for other things, more valuable things than planning and sitting at my computer hour on top of hour to try to plan the quote unquote perfect trip. So how did that go, you might be wondering? Was I able to be more spontaneous, be present on my trip, and embrace reality versus expectations? Well, I'm happy to report I was. Surprisingly, it worked really well for me. In fact, it's a pretty darn good thing I wasn't tied to a specific outcome, because 4 days before the trip, I was coming home with some pre-Thanksgiving supplies. I wanted to be in good shape for hosting the holiday when I got back because I'd only have a few days after the trip. And for Thanksgiving, I usually have a large crowd, so I was trying to get in front of that. So I went out and I did some errands and I got a bunch of stuff, and I'm coming out of the driveway with a bazillion bags lined up and down my arms, way more capacity than I really should be carrying. And I proceeded to step up the 4 cement steps that take me to the walkway to my house, and I caught my foot on the top step. I tried to catch my balance, sort of doing that little dance, scurrying down in slow motion. It felt like step, step, sway, step, step, sway, something like that. And I almost caught my footing a couple of times, But ultimately, I was unable to catch myself and I fell flat on my face, like literally fell on my face. My face crashed hard directly into the cement. So I got up slowly and began to assess the damage. And even though my nose was bleeding profusely and one of my arms hurt a little bit, everything else seemed to be intact and functioning. So I went inside and stopped the bleeding from my nose. And honestly, I went back about my business. I went back outside. I grabbed the bags I dropped, came inside, put everything away, switched it over a little laundry. Well, about 15, 20 minutes later, one of my daughters and my granddaughter walk in. And as soon as she saw me, she said, "Oh my God, what happened to you? You need to go to the hospital right now." And as I was trying to figure out why she thought that the minute she came through the door, I started to lose the vision in my left eye. It was very quick. It just happened really quickly. Like at the same time as she's coming in and she's saying those things, I started to get really blurred vision and then it was almost gone. So I went to the mirror and really was quite shocked at what I saw. My face was so swollen. I looked like I had gone a few rounds in a boxing match, and my left eye was just about completely shut. I'll spare you all the details of my younger daughter calling her older sister and calling my husband and calling her boyfriend and everyone gathering around me in the next 15 minutes or so, and my trip to not one but two emergency rooms and staying in the emergency rooms for a total duration of about 15 hours. But ultimately, I came away with a fractured eye orbit, so the socket around your eye, and a fractured arm. And I felt like I got run over by a bus. But ultimately, I was home. It could have been much, much worse. My actual eye was not damaged, which is what I was worried about. Basically, when I heard that I got a fractured eye orbit, I was really worried there was going to be some damage to my eye or my sight long term because it was still a little off. But they told me it should come back and that the eye orbit would correct itself. It would take about 8 weeks, and same story for my arm. So believe it or not, the doctors cleared me to fly. So technically I could go on the trip, the one that I was talking about whether or not I should plan for. It was only 4 days away. So I had to decide if I felt up to it or not. I didn't make any decisions right away. I waited a couple of days and then ultimately decided we were going to go. The truth is I knew I would relax more if I was away from home and didn't have all my normal work and all my normal routines to think about. So off we went, even though I knew I would have to take it very slowly, that my mobility was limited, and my face was black and blue and swollen, and my arm was in a sling. But you know what? I wasn't tied to a specific picture of what the trip would look like. So there was no expectations, and therefore no disappointment. Yeah, I had some limitations and I had to ask for help with some things that I normally wouldn't, but we were really glad that we were part of the wedding. It was such a joyous occasion. And while this wasn't our best trip ever, it was really more about the location and that not being our favorite state ever. But we saw a lot of cool things and we meandered through a bunch of towns and sampled a lot of what Texas had to offer. And ultimately, we had a good time and we created some great memories, and we did all that without some very detailed master plan. That whole thing, this whole scenario, the planning, the falling, the trip, it reinforced some of the lessons that have shown up for me over and over in 2023. And I'd like to share a few of them with you as we're closing out the year. So the first one, finding more time is not really about finding more time. I mean, we all have 24 hours in a day and 7 days in a week, but it's all about allocating your time in alignment with the things you value most. If you're spending a ton of time on, say, cleaning your house, then you better make sure you value a clean house more than you do time with the family and friends or one of your hobbies. If you say you want to exercise more, but you don't have time, you need to look at where your time is going. Do you spend time watching TV, working extra hours that you don't really need to, fulfilling obligations for too many people and causes? Where is your time going, and do you value those things over getting healthier? For me, that lesson showed up over and over this year, but in the most recent example, it was around that trip. I no longer value planning the most detailed itinerary for a trip. I'd rather spend my time elsewhere, and therefore I'm not going to allocate that level of time anymore to trip planning. Lesson 2 is about reality versus expectations. That gap is very often the place where most of us feel disappointment, resentment, sadness. But the truth is, living in the here and now helps us to avoid that. If we plan every single detail out in our minds for a party, event, situation, whatever it is, and we play that over and over and over, we think through every possible outcome, but then it doesn't go like we pictured, we can get very disappointed. If we don't overplan though, and instead we just create a loose framework for whatever it is, it gives us a little guidance or structure, but there's still a lot of room for how the details will play out. And since we have no preconceived notion about what every little detail should look like, we can avoid that mismatch between what we envisioned and what reality really brought us. And the bonus to that one is that we will get ongoing reinforcement that we can handle whatever comes our way. Yes, some things are harder than others, but just because we plan doesn't mean that things won't come up or they won't be hard. When they do come up, even if we didn't account for them, we'll deal with them. We always do. And we'll be okay. And we'll make the next best decision at that time. Planning's not going to prevent any of that. So all that time thinking about the what ifs, it's just wasted time that we could be spending on things we truly value. All right, lesson 3. It's okay to ask for help when we need it. For so many of us, we feel like we have to do it all. We have to be it all. We don't want to let anyone down. We don't want to inconvenience anybody. But asking for help does not make us a failure or less than. We'll not be looked down on because we couldn't do everything. In fact, we may actually give others an opportunity to feel like they're contributing more. They're needed. And in many cases, they get the chance to shine where they normally wouldn't because you were taking care of everything. In most cases, they're very willing to step up. I know when I asked my husband and kids to help with certain things that I normally wouldn't because of my arm, I didn't get pushback, not once. In fact, they stepped up more than I have seen in probably all the time we've been together. And I asked people for things this holiday that I normally wouldn't as well. People to bring different things, people to make more of the dishes so that I didn't have to make as much, help with setting up, et cetera, et cetera. And you know what? Everyone did. And there was no grumbling and I felt less pressure. So we create this thing in our heads that says we have to do it all, but it's our expectation of ourselves. It's not the expectation others have. We do not need to be all things to everyone in every situation. And knowing how to bow out, knowing when to let someone else take the lead or ask for help is a sign of strength, a sign of confidence. And really, it's a commitment to our own well-being. Ask for help when you need it. All right, the last one I want to touch on is number 4. As many of you know, my focus in 2023 was to bring more fun into my life. And I definitely feel like I did that. It mostly came in smaller, unexpected ways versus big orchestrated activities. I mean, who would have thought that having a fractured arm and being unable to pull up my nylons for that wedding would have been funny? But picture this, my husband, manly man construction worker, hands as scratchy and rough as could be, trying to pull up my nylons and quickly realizing how easy they run. Then picture him trying again on the second pair, but being way, way, way more careful, only to have the same thing happen when they get up almost all the way up to the top. It was really funny. It was hysterical in the moment, especially when he said, "Geesh, I can't imagine why anyone would wear these things." And it was just so funny. And old me probably would have got really frustrated and really mad and maybe even angry at him because I had this picture of myself in a certain dress with a certain pair of shoes and, going to the wedding looking a certain way. And it didn't happen. It didn't happen. Even though I didn't look like I expected to look. I mean, I couldn't do my hair. I had one arm in a sling. What I concluded is the secret to finding more joy, finding more fun, It's not about those big orchestrated activities or adventures. It's about learning to let your guard down. It's about learning to be grateful for what you do have versus mad over what you don't have. And it's all about being fully present and authentic. Take the masks off and let yourself be free. Let yourself be who you are and just enjoy the present. Get out of your head. Don't worry about everything being a quote unquote perfect way. It's all about accepting what is, not having expectations about what should be, and just enjoying life as it comes. I hope that some of these messages that I received over and over in 2023 can help you as you reflect on your own year in review and think about the year you're about to embark on. I strongly suggest that you take a little bit of time to do that. Sit back and reflect on what messages showed up for you repeatedly. I guarantee you'll find some patterns if you really think about it. And those might be areas where you've really grown and seen yourself flourish, or they might be areas you want to set up as goals for 2024. Please know I am so thankful for each and every one of you, and I know how precious your time is, and I truly appreciate you coming back week after week to listen. This thing about putting the podcast out there, getting guests, coming up with topics, recording, producing, getting it all edited and up there for you guys to listen to. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot more work than I actually anticipated it to take. But knowing that it's helping some of you, it really makes this project of love even more precious to me. And I'm going to keep trying to commit to doing it for another year, as long as you guys are listening and getting some value out of it. And please don't forget, I'd love to hear feedback about the show. What's working, what's not, what you'd like to hear more of, and what you'd like to hear less of. Any and all feedback is welcome. I wish you all a very, very happy and healthy new year, and talk to you again in 2024. Thank you for listening to this episode of Message in the Middle with Marianne. If you enjoyed the podcast, please take a minute to share it and write a review, as it helps bring new listeners to our audience. If you'd like to keep the conversation going between episodes, please join us at Facebook group Message in the Middle with Marianne.